Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking part in this panel session. What I wanted to do was to offer you a couple of minutes each just to position yourselves. I know you come from a wide variety of industries, Channel 4 and EasyJet, TTI, who are main, for white goods, power tools, things like that, and Rentokil Initial with the whole B2B, B2C business you have as well. There's some great challenges and a diverse set of circumstances you've got. So,
good morning. I'm Shawnee. I head up the information security practice for Rentokil Initial. I think we're one of the largest pest control companies in the world. We operate in 77 countries, 40,000 employees. And our challenges are quite wide and diverse. So at one end of the scale, it's how to keep our field colleagues safe and how to keep our customer data safe. And we have a real challenge in trying to actually train our frontline staff and make them security and cyber aware. And at the other end of the scale, I think when we're looking at the challenges of trying to recruit and promote security within the business, trying to find staff and resources. For example, I've just been on a recruitment drive for 2 security analysts. It's taken me 12 weeks. I think I've finally found one. Unfortunately, we've got the first woman security analyst joining our team in our history, which is great news. But the market is dire. There's very few people with the skills and capability out there. So we are actively now looking within the business to see if we've got people who we can actually promote and drive. So I think the 2 things for me really are, how do we raise awareness among a very diverse, multicultural, multi-language frontline bunch of people, and the second thing then is how do we actually manage that and actually raise the skills within the business.
I'm John Rufus. I'm from a company called TTI. We're very similar to Rentokil in some ways, we're very much B2B and B2C as well. I think compared to Rentokil, we're probably starting off on the journey of security. We haven't had a security capability until I've come in, and I'm trying to basically deal with security hygiene and to establish awareness and get people aware and get their support as I try to build security within our organisation. We're 3 different networks that don't talk together. We've got separate organisations, separate entities rather, across Europe. So effectively, I've come in and I'm being a CISO for the first time to 22 different companies under the TTI umbrella. So it's quite a challenge, and obviously technology doesn't exist. It's all different, and in many cases we just don't have it in the first place. Processes still need to be developed, but the only thing that is common in people, and people's very much what I'm trying to use at the moment to get us at least underway with our journey for security. My background has been very much in security operations and have been working for over 20 years now. And originally I worked with some people in Australia to develop the first snare agents, so many of you may have seen snare or used snare. So I've developed some of those and done some very good work, particularly with government defence organisations. And I'm hoping that experience will help me go forward with what I need to put in at TTI.
Yeah, good morning. My name's John Eliot. I'm the Group Data Protection Officer at EasyJet, and you're thinking, who let him in? I mean, we're pretty fed up of talking to the Data Protection Officer, and you let one into the building. We were having a CISO day. So in my defence, I used to be head of information security at Building Society, and I realised at one stage that having a knowledge of privacy as well as a lawyer would put me in a good stead to argue with them. So I took myself back to university and did a privacy law degree. And I ended up working in data protection more than I do in information security now. I'm here for 2 reasons. One is, having gone through the whole security awareness and training developers and everything to do security by default and design, I now find that I am in a constant stage of deja vu, trying to train people to do privacy by design and privacy by default, ranging from the developers to the business analysts, the program managers, and there's many of the same challenges that, gosh, I'm here again. And secondly, I assume at some stage we might talk about user behavior monitoring. And from the data data protection officer's perspective, all those brilliant tools that allow you to work out inside a threat and who's a real user and who's that user that might be just about to turn to be an insider threat have got enormous data protection implications, which is what I did my dissertation in a while ago, so I'm really interested in that side. And finally, I write training courses for an organisation called Pluralsight. I do video training courses on exciting topics like the what's it called? The GD... yeah, data protection, yeah, that thing.
So hi, I'm Brian Brackenbury. Currently the CISO at Channel 4. I've been there since 2011, and prior to that I was head of InfoSec at the BBC. I was at the Beat for about 13 years. I think it's kind of quite similar to the journey that you've been on with TTI, that when I joined Channel 4, there wasn't really anything with regards to information security. They'd had a contractor that had been doing it, Roger, for about 18 months. And so it really was building up from scratch for what was or is effectively a pretty young company. Channel 4's only 30, 35 or 40 years old compared to the BBC, where there was a very strict structure, which was carefully designed to make sure that you could never get anything done. So to come into Channel 4, where it was very, very dynamic, you're able to make things happen very, very quickly, but of course first you've got to get them to buy in, which, as you all know, it can be quite difficult for trying to get them to invest in a solution or a situation where there's no return on investment or very little. And we've been kind of very fortunate in that there's been more and more breaches within the industry, and they've sort of circled Channel 4, and then thankfully for me, probably not so much for Kate if she's in the room, Sony got attacked in 2014, and that was the point where my CEO had said, you know, every year when you do that list of projects and we say pick one, he said, well, I've had another look at your list and I want you to do them all. And there was a sudden change in focus within Channel 4. But I say the fact that there was very little there in terms of tool sets or technologies, but you're absolutely right in that we had an awful lot of resource available to us, which is the end user. And Nigel said to me last night, you know, have a think about what you might want to say about this. And unfortunately, I spent far too long thinking about it. And I sort of realised that I think it's down to the treatment of your own staff. If you treat them or speak about them as if they are the weakest link in your chain, then that's how they're going to behave. Whereas if you value them as a tool and a resource, and you're able to sort of use them kind of as nodes or probes within your network to be able to feed back, I think you're going to get a much more positive response. So I think this would be quite interesting to hear how other people have sort of approached that whole idea of training, whether or not they've just gone for the mandatory, there's online training, or whether they've personalised it, which I think that's what you have to do, and sort of evolve it on a constant basis to just ensure that you're getting the most out of those staff. And they're invested in it as much as you are, because otherwise I think you're kind of on a hiding to nothing if it's you against the rest of the world.
If we can pick up on that point and carry on with that, what I want to do, just so over the next 40 minutes or so, is really look at the three aspects, I think, of the human factor. One of the most challenging ones is the user in it, and spend quite a bit of time on that. I'd also like to look at that whole human ecosystem which helps in developing security, from management, developers, and everybody else who's got parts to play in it, and how do you inculcate security into that sort of team. And then I'd like to spend just a few minutes at the end looking at the talent pipeline and how we work on that as a challenge as well. So, Brian, picking up on your point there about then the end user and such like, has anybody else got views on what you can do to get the user really as one of your first line of defence?
Oh yes, so we operate quite a diverse business. I think one of the countries have got something like 34 dialects and languages. and a majority of our frontline staff can't even read, let alone actually understand things like information security. So the way we're approaching it is saying that two things really key in our business. Number one, health and safety. Everybody has to get home safe. Nobody would go out on site without a jacket, without the steel boots, without the hard hat, etc. And we're positioning security within the business along the same way. Nobody would leave the building with a laptop that isn't encrypted, isn't locked. They wouldn't go and use Wi-Fi at McDonald's. They wouldn't leave it on a train. So we're trying to position that very much as 10 golden rules, and actually trying to embed that in the business very much pictorially rather than long, diatribes about security, missives published by the chief exec. So I think for me it's really about how you get that message across. Second thing is that message has to be relevant to those individuals in their personal life. So we don't talk about when you're at work you must be safe, because what we actually talk about is, if you're on the internet, how much can we find about you because you're not taking care with your data? How can you keep your bank account secure? How can you keep your PC secure at home? How can you actually use these services safely? And then they bring that to work with them, because that's relevant to them, that's of value to them, and it's not just somebody in the work setting saying that you must do this because you work for us and you have to be safe.
John, any?
At TTI, I think I can relate to everything that you've just mentioned there, and that's what I'm trying to get to. And we've still got some way to go. What I do have, though, is the confidence of the people that I'm working for. So people at the front line, particularly our financial people, are very much on board with what I'm trying to do, and they're genuinely interested in what it is that I'm doing. It's a journey for us, and trying to show them about awareness, and in particular, like every organisation, we get our phishing campaigns and things like that. And we've had quite a lot of those over the last couple of months. Initially, what was happening was the finance people were sending me their emails and asking me, is this a phish? And having to take time to each person, instead of just saying yes or no, but actually to take the time and take them on the journey and explain to them why it is or why it's not. We've had courses in place. I've been spending time with all our financial directors across EMEA, and that's resonating now, and they're seeing the value of that, not just within the workplace, but this is stuff that they're taking home, and they're showing their families, and they're showing exactly what they can do to protect themselves at home. So for me, that's really important. I love that they're on board about that. I also like the fact that I've been able to give them courses to do about phishing, and they're all coming up and saying, John, I got 90% or I got 100%, and they're quite proud of doing that. So while I have that, I think there's opportunities to do great things there, but we'll keep going with it, which is good.
Joe, I really want to emphasise what Brian, isn't it, said?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But it's about your users being brilliant sensors of, gosh, that's just happened, you want to know about it, or about to do this. Users actually, though, my experience is they're terrible controls, because if your user is your control's probably going to fail there, and therefore we have to design systems to make sure to give our users the best chance of doing all the right things. There's some really great papers that came out of UCL from Angela Sasser on the user is not the enemy, and about usability. And if you look at how, and something I've done a lot, is look at how the organisation works, and look at what we ask our users to do on a really regular basis, and ask, are we asking them to do good security things or bad security things? So if you're asking your user to type in their username and password into random things on a regular basis because you haven't invested in SSO, then your user is going to type their username and password into random things on a regular basis, which includes every single phishing email they get. You have to build your environment using some of the great examples from the masses of work that's been done on usability, so that you're reducing your users' cognitive load. We all know that phishing is, 15% successful, whatever you do, almost, yeah? I'm looking for nods about, we got one at the week. Are we recording? You are recording, aren't you? Right, fine. We'll talk. Right, but
Tell us later.
But we've all had those experiences where you think, oh, you didn't really, did you? Oh, well, yeah. So build your users up for success, And if you're saying, well, it's really quite expensive to put two-factor authentication in for every user's login. Well, you know, how much are you wasting money on phishing training and stuff like that, that maybe having 2FA would take out the way and actually give your users a better chance. So it's not using the user as a control, it's setting the user up for success every time.
Yeah. In terms of the huge hype there has been around GDPR in recent months, and particularly, God knows how many times we had emails in May asking us to validate things. Clearly that has reached some people in a level of consciousness. Has that been a real advantage to, do you find in your organisation, to prompting that conversation about an understanding of security?
It's like the whole world suddenly decided talking about what your little niche for a living. It was very interesting. But what it has meant is that the user community are really good sensors at the moment, because everyone, I mean, you can't help have heard of GDPR, which is great. So users are now coming to the privacy team saying, are we going to do this with somebody's data? Is that okay? Is there a GDPR implication? So we're getting lots more of, is that an okay thing to do? And the answer is, yeah, of course it's okay. It's really hard not to do that and also fly the passenger to where they want to go. So it's like core of what we do as a business. And then the second thing is we spent a lot of time on breach awareness. So not security awareness, but breach awareness. And not breaches like you all think of a breach, but breaches according to the law, which is I emailed somebody the wrong thing. So not a security breach where you've run an incident up, but a personal data breach as defined by GDPR. So our breach awareness is much better, which has led us to understand that many of our systems that we give to our users are not set up to let them succeed to send emails to the right people, for example. So it's about, and again, they're sensors, so it's taking that information in. So the awareness was massively useful. As a side note, most of it was unnecessary completely, because if you didn't have permission to ask people for marketing, you didn't have people to ask them for permission for marketing. So,
yeah, Brian, any views from you on?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's as I said, when things suddenly happen in the public and they directly affect the individual, they start to take note. So the Cambridge Analytica story that broke. I was genuinely surprised having conversations with people, particularly senior execs, that said, I've deleted my profile off of Facebook because of that. And I was like, but hang on a minute, it's been free. You must have realised that you were the product. It was kind of glaringly obvious. And just because you've taken yourself off of Facebook, but you've now you're doing more on Instagram, which is owned by, look. But for us, we were always, I'm looking at you, we were always very lucky in that our legal team in Channel 4 were absolutely hot on data protection with Husna, but it was always the case that the rest of the company thought, we have a data protection department to deal with that. And GDPR, unfortunately, for some it's been months, for others it's been years. But when that started to come out, and because of the approach, yes, we took the line that we had to do mandatory GDPR training, which was relatively successful, but I'm afraid when it's mandatory, it's a box-ticking exercise. But what really worked was the opportunity to go to each department, have a conversation with them. And bear in mind, Channel 4 is quite a small company, so this doesn't always work everywhere, but 1,000 staff, you're able to go to every briefing and say, let's have a chat with you, let's explain what it is, and let's break it down. We are talking about those emails that you get that have got CVs on, why are you still keeping those? And we also did the same thing of assigning data champions within each department. But they've really taken to it, and now they're invested in it because they're starting thinking about, well, what about my data? Who's got my data, and how many subject access requests can I send in a day to as many companies as possible? Thanks for that. But they're starting to realise that the information that we hold, we've got 20 million records of people that are registered with all four. That's a hell of a responsibility, and therefore we do take that seriously, and we're very, very careful with that, rightly so. but people are genuinely interested. What are you doing with it? Where's it going? Are you sharing it with anybody? And why do you need to know how many bathrooms I've got in my house? You know, it's absolutely crazy, but it's refreshing to see. And it's the same with information security. When something happens, when it hits you, when it's a WannaCry or a NotPetya, or it takes out a service that you can't get access to anymore, suddenly you start to take note. And we're kind of a bit like vultures in a way that we sort of latch on to every single one like that, because that's our opportunity to go and have a conversation with the board and say, we need to fix that gap, otherwise we could be that next person in the Daily Mail.
Pete, any thoughts from you?
I think I'd echo most of what I was saying. Quick show of hands. Who's actually raised a data subject access request in the room? Oh, interesting. Yeah. And I think, you know, the message for me is all these things are great tools to help you raise awareness within the business. You know, that second slide of your board presentation, which says it would never happen here, would it? And you give the list of all the incidents that they've had. So I think you've got to jump on the back of Leeds. You've got to put real-world cases around Leeds and actually take them back out to the staff. The challenge that we have, I think, as a function is that the amount of queries, questions, stuff that come into us now, we've got to be able to field and answer those. If we start to shut up the doors, put the shutters up, stop responding to that, is it a phishing request, stop responding to, is that data, of course it's a stupid person. You know, we can't take that approach, because that is part of the education programme now. We've got to drive that forward, we've got to resource that.
John?
I think GDPR, what everybody said is absolutely right, it's raised awareness. It's had a different effect to us in the organisation, working with, particularly with our executive, who were worried most of all that we had databases of people, lists of people who had been subscribed to different things, through warranties, through marketing campaigns and what have you, and their response was, well, if we lose all those, then it's not going to be as big anymore and we can't reach as many people. But the ones that we did delete, and the ones that we had permission to delete, were we able to do anything with them anyway? So So from that respect, it's encouraged us at the board level to start to think a little bit differently as to how we deal with that information and how we use that to work for us. And there's implications around what we do with Google Analytics, which we do a hell of a lot of work on our websites, as many organisations do, and interpreting that and how we can get some value for that as well. The retention of it is always a question that keeps going as well. We're still defining as to what that is, and we're working very closely and understand now a lot better as to why marketing are trying to do things here and what they're doing with that, and making sure that we're following, but having enough robust processes to be able to put there as well. So it's a journey for us too. The other thing too is, one thing that I noted was a lot of people within my organisation, when they learned about GDPR and what they were doing, they were basically making lists of companies that they wanted to send subject access requests to, and they were looking at the calendar waiting for May 25th so they could go bang, 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 and we had several people do that. So you know, at least they're proactive, I guess. So yeah, it's an experience.
Okay. Before we move on to talk about the rest of the ecosystem, the people ecosystem for security within companies and organisations, and one or two people have already alluded to some of that, I'd like to open it to the audience. Is there a question or even a view you've got about the user aspect? So just limiting it to thoughts on the user at the moment. Any questions and such like?
Morning, my name's Mike Everall. I'm CISO for 10x Banking, so a startup put together by Anthony Jenkins, ex-CEO of Barclays. My background's predominantly been in investment banking, capital markets. I'm now working and surrounded by millennials. It's an interesting change, but the issue I'm finding in particular is with the younger generation. The whole issue about privacy, Facebook, data going, they're asking about it, but they don't really care because it's been part of how they've grown up. So trying to get the information across is, yes, but it's your data which should be being controlled. You should care more than, oh yeah, well, it's just what I do. And it's that educational side. I mean, I'm actually now, I bribe people with food for things. I do pizza events, so people will come in. No one has ever turned down free pizza when it's going to training programs. But getting across to a younger generation, it comes then to some of the points we're talking about, the retention and recruitment, getting across that they have to do these things for themselves, and this is the reason why. It's easier with an older generation. I mean, when I was talking to previously with investment banksters, it's a lot easier because they can see this as a direct financial impact. Having saying that to someone who's 25, they don't really care, but trying to get them to move into that journey is harder. Is there any particular models that you guys have been doing with that demographic to try to actually push them on? They say that they're interested, but they're not saying doing anything about it because they just think it's part and parcel of life.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you. Just based on my experience, a few years ago, I'd have been right behind that. And perhaps it is the millennials where they've turned up and they just don't seem to understand the benefit of locking a front door. But I think go slightly behind them. Go to the generation that's behind them, and they seem to be unusually a lot more responsible. I mean, my son's 13. Absolutely seems to understand the whole issue of privacy and security and challenging people when they're, even if I say to him, oh, let me help you with your homework, give us your school login and I'll get in. No, you're not allowed to do that, Dad, because my teacher said that that's a bad thing to do. And it just seems to become more natural. And it seems to be sort of generational, I think, so we're of a certain age where we have particular beliefs. And then suddenly you've got the generation behind us that were a little bit more free, and then it was all about programming and coding, and let's just get it out there. And suddenly you've got this this younger generation that gives me a little bit more faith in what we might have. Particularly, I think, because they're starting to train about information security more so in schools. They've realised that there's an importance. So data protection, information security, coding, and coding securely and safely. My approach would be to just, you've got to trust them, you've got to supply them with the information and help guide them towards making the right decisions. But ultimately, that's up to them. But they need to understand the responsibility, have accountability, and understand that there are consequences of their actions. And as I said, they seem to be getting it a little bit more. Unless I've completely missed the point and my son's pulled the wool over my eyes, which is possible.
So, as you say, the 30, but it's the 20...
It's the nows, yeah.
23 to 28 sort of band, right? The ones who we're actively trying to pull into our field. They're the ones where it's this educational, and it's a cultural element.
Exactly.
And I'm trying to not break that, but mould that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's our problem. And then when we're gone, the next that generation are going to have it easy because the generation behind them seem to understand it. But let's hope that somewhere down the line somebody else gets to suffer as much as we have.
Any other views?
I think I'd also sort of disagree with you, I think, because it's quite a challenge to harvest that, the strength that you get from the innovation in the business, and then try to suppress that by putting controls in place. So one of the tricks that we use, and we have a lot of millennials into the business, so we've been a Google house for 10 years now, so we've had to live with that for quite a while now, is we run a session called Social Media Assassination session. But basically I will get the IT guys simply just to go through the social media of the team over the weeks preceding the meeting, and we'll just come in and we'll just have a few flash slides that says, whose car registration is this? Your MOT's running out in July. Your last comment on Twitter was that I'd rather be a nudist than wear modern fashion. And we actually put these up, and they start looking, where do you get all the information from? So, well, you idiot, have posted it on Facebook. You've made this public knowledge. I'm not a friend with you. I don't know your account. In fact, I know you've really started work here 2 weeks ago. But you're sharing this level of information with people that you're now working with and want to make an impression on, and you're happy to do that. And you're surprised how soon that actually starts to take traction and actually do it. The other side of that is they do bring a huge amount of innovation. But a young lady that joined us 18 months ago as a graduate, and we've got a really old clunky ERP system, and we were trying to write a set of slides to explain to our chief exec that it's old and clunky, we want this nice shiny new one. She was there for 2 days. She created a cartoon video using some freeware on the internet, put it in front of the chief exec, and he went, oh, I get it. Yeah. So, you've got to trade that value, I think, yeah.
Any other points? No. Okay. Thank you for that. That's yeah, an interesting thought. What I'd like to talk about now is the ecosystem of from the chief executive and the board and senior managers through to all of those people who are part of that security thing, developers, etc. And how, can we share any ideas on how we've engaged with that and what your feel of how that's moved on? John, are you happy to? Would you?
Sure. So boards is quite an interesting one because do you all have that 20 minutes a year when you have to sit in front of the non-exec board and describe what cybersecurity is and what you've done and how much money you want to spend in the next year and why you're not going to be I have to think of not the next. Sorry, not the next Sony. But do you know what I mean? Because it's like, or the next talk or car phone warehouse or whatever it is. It's like, because that's always the question. It's like, oh, I just saw that in the press. Well, we're going to be like that. It's always the board's thing. And really it is, you need to understand, you need to have a grown-up conversation. I've always found you need to have a grown-up conversation with a board and a regulator about where you really honestly are, which might not be what your management want you to say, but I think there's absolutely no point in polishing the thing that you don't want to really polish, yeah? And also, what their motivators are, controlling risk and making profit generally. So it's about putting what you do in terms of that, of controlling risk, of letting them understand where they are on the risk thing. Because boards are very good at understanding risk. They usually understand what their risk for the business is, and I've often tried to describe risk by saying, well, if this is your risk appetite, this is what the control framework would look like in the organisation. Do you want us to be that type of organisation, or this type of organisation, or this type of organisation? So try and put it in tangible things. I had a great conversation with a customer office director who said, yeah, we can never lose one card number. It's like, that's great. We take about 32 million a year of them. And now my error rate of one member of staff in a contact centre potentially doing something silly is now one in. That will happen, but we need to make them take their clothes off when they come to the contact centre. They have to put noddy suits on. You have a clean room. Do we want that environment, or is actually? Do you really mean that? So having conversations that put it into, this is what the organisation would look and feel like if we were to try and hit that level of risk appetite is one thing. In terms of developers, train them really well. Spend time training them about how they get hacked. There's a lovely bloke I know called Troy Hunt. Some of you might have met Troy. He does an awesome course called Hack Yourself First. It shows developers it teaches developers how to be hackers, but by understanding it from the other side, they absolutely get it. In a lot, you can teach them the theory of not writing SQL injection. You can teach them the theory of escaping things. You can teach them all the theories, fine. But actually, if you teach them how to hack, number one, you get some cheap pen testers for a career progression. Seriously, because we don't know how much pen testers cost and what a pain they are. And secondly, once they've seen how easy it is, they go, I didn't think it was that easy. And so teaching them how to hack is probably the best thing you do for developers.
Yeah. Brian.
Does anybody ever remember Reggie Perrin?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So I wouldn't be where I'm here today, Reggie, if I didn't understand the business and what it does. And that's important wherever you work. If you don't actually understand what that department's for and what it's doing, you can't then advise them on the security. So I need to spend time with Film 4 or with the ad sales department or with commissioning to understand what their motivations are. Because otherwise I'm just blindly going in and going, well, no, you can't do that, and I'm not going to allow that through the firewall, and they'll find another route. So echoing exactly what you said, if I've got my 10, 15, 20 minutes with the board, and they say to me, what's it look like this year, Brian? Then I need to explain it to them in a way that they're going to understand, because otherwise the only thing that I am to them is a business risk, and that's it. And the only other piece of advice that I think I'd give on top of what you've said is that if you want to get on well with your execs, get on well with their assistants, because they are the most important people in the company, and they are the people that will give you the additional 5 minutes if you ever need it with your CEO.
So just quickly on assistance, you know we often do one size fits all because it's easier. So in terms of who wants the best anti-phishing training in the business, who wants to really understand security, is not the chief exec, but the chief exec's PA.
Pete, John?
Yeah, I think building on that, as I mentioned earlier, security cannot get in the way of innovation. You know, we could be secure as you like, but if you can't operate as a business and make any money, then we're going to be shut down pretty quickly, I think. The other thing I think is security is not about the information security team. Everybody in the business is part of the information security team. So we talked about the end users earlier. We had a discussion over dinner last night about how the security team are expected to be expert in coding, how we're supposed to be expert in case hardening the systems, how we know the common reference model and apply it to every piece of equipment that goes out the door. We can't do that. And a lot of people coming through the organisation as really good, really great developers have not got that grounded in that basic knowledge of how to do what they do in a secure fashion. And I think what we've got to do is we've got to help coach, gamify that solution, train them to be hackers, let them see what the end results of that is, and actually bring them on board. Because if they are developing in a secure way and you trust them to develop in a secure way, that's a huge amount of my work done. I don't have to worry about at the end of the process, oh God, I've got to go and sort out a pen test, and I'm going to have that argument with the board because it can't go live because it's not secure and it's delayed the program by 6 months, it costs £1 million. It doesn't happen. It just flows through neatly. So I think most of our effort is not about Ministry of No, but it's about making sure that every part of the organisation, from the board right the way down to the front line, has an understanding of what they need to do to contribute to us being a secure organisation, having the level of security posture that's appropriate for what we do.
Good. Did you want to say something, John, or not? No. Anything from the floor on that whole piece of reaching out to the board or development teams and all those sorts of things? Please.
Richard Sykes, going back to the point about the board, if you suddenly found yourself with a major new investment coming into the company, turns to the board and says, I need to get independent auditable assurance of your positioning in this area, could you turn to, do you know where you would turn to get that independent auditable assurance that you are strong and well placed in terms of your culture and the way you're working here to satisfy that new external investor?
Okay, I think that's a good question. I am not a fan of ISO 27001, which is what most of those external auditors will come and do. Now, anybody who's read the NCSC guidance on passwords and the 27001 guidance on passwords, you know, they shall have 8 characters, one alpha, one numeric, whatever, and change it every 30 days. And the risk of changing it every 30 days is blah, blah, blah. So for me, the two things I do, one is I regularly try and benchmark where we are in terms of a security score against other peers in the market. So we look at incidents, we look at, I work closely, in fact, with a lot of CISOs across our business. In fact, I work with all the CISOs of the other boards that our board are on. And I've also done some work with our investors, so we do a regular round every year, but I actually report to the Chief Finance Officer, and again, I'm going to him and saying, what are the investors looking for from us in terms of how are we investing in security, what is our security scale, what's the culture of the organisation look like, how many incidents we've got, have we got a breach plan? So to be honest, I'm not really worried about that. Two things can happen. Either I've done a good job, get a pat on the back, or I haven't done a good job, and they'll go off on a different tangent with a different CISO. So I don't think you can do the best that you can. You can make sure the board's on board. You can make sure the board understands the risk. You work really closely with the risk and compliance infrastructure within the team. But if they want to bring KPMG and do it, great. We'll have the argument about what controls are appropriate or not. They will look at it purely black and white. They won't look at it in the context of the business that we operate. When we look at the context of the business operate, I'm pretty confident they're going to be happy with what we're doing.
Any other views?
Famous last words, by the way.
I think benchmarking is really good tool to use, and it's something that I'm using to put my own arguments forward with my executives. We're coming from a different area in that we've grown by acquisition, and there's potential to do that in the future as well, but people may also be interested in us. But but being able to benchmark against similar organisations to us and to talk about what sort of security controls that they have and say to them, this is what they're doing, we need to do that as well, is a really good way to bring them in line with what you're trying to do. And for me, I also need that to be able to get budget at the moment, because they have no concept of what a security budget is before, and so I'm educating them on that as well. Like all things, which I'm trying to do, it's organic, it's slow, but we're taking steps to do that. But benchmarking is a really good tool to use.
I guess I'd come back and say I wonder what the question that's being asked, because there's two questions we're asking. One is this organisation doing the right thing? In other words, have they set up their control and risk framework to represent what they do as an organisation? And the second question is, are they actually doing it? And so the first question would be, well, which do you want to find out about? Because that would determine who you'd ask to do that. And from the second perspective, as a CISO, I want to, and I'm not anymore, but I would have wanted to have been in the position where I had a control assurance framework that I could demonstrate that the controls I were running, they were running all the time and they were running effectively. So I'm not wanting an external auditor to tell me that, because frankly, if you've bought a control and you don't know if it's running and you don't know if it's effective, then you haven't bought a control. And I've struggled with, and I've been mainly in the second line in information security, not the first line. When your first line is just, yeah, we bought that, yeah, but every time we pen test you, that we always break in there because they're never turned on or functioning or effective. And one of the things that GDPR asks, and it's hidden in Article 32(1)s B and D, is the ability to assure the ongoing confidentiality, integrity and availability, which to me says control operational assurance. And in 32(1)D it says a way of testing that your controls are working, so it's controlled effectiveness assurance. And so what I would be saying to the external investor is, don't come and test my controls, come and test my assurance framework. If that's the question, and if the question is, are we doing the right thing, then go and look at some of our peers and see where we are sat with that.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, just so that, because there's the thing, right? So you've got a company that decides that information security is important, so that they'll hire a CISO. The CISO will then get a team behind them. So you've got a team of highly skilled information security experts that actually know their stuff. You have an investor that comes in and they say, I want to know that you're safe and secure and that you've got a mature framework. If I go up there and tell them, they don't believe me. But if I pay Deloitte £50,000 to go in and tell them, then they'll go, oh, thanks for that, that's brilliant. And I sometimes I don't understand that. On one hand, I kind of do, and you have to make it play to your advantage, so that you end up doing all the groundwork, but you pretty much just hand it over to them and go, can you just put your moniker on that and take it up to them, and then suddenly, yay, you've got the additional money for the resources. But I just find it quite strange. I don't think that they'd ever have that situation where you'd have our head of marketing go up and go, here's a really great campaign, this is what we're going to do, and they'll go, that's great, Dan, but actually we're going to pay somebody else because we don't believe you. But the minute that they say it's great, then we'll be all right with it.
Thanks very much for those comments on that. I'd like to spend just the last couple of minutes just talking about the skills pipeline and you know, that part of the human factor. And you know, where do you see the challenges in that? Where do you see the salvations? Pete, do you want to start?
Yes, so I think we see an awful lot of technical people coming through thinking they're going to make good security specialists, good CISOs, good security people. And for me, I think we've got a bit of a change in dynamic now. We're not looking at security as a technical discipline. We're looking at it as a business discipline and a business change management discipline. So I think finding people with that level of aptitude within the business. For example, I've recently employed, I think it was an insurance claims processor, to come and do our governance compliance piece. Find the people with that right attitude and aptitude, you can train the other elements through that process. So for me, pipeline is don't rely on the outside world, because there are very, very few good and capable people out in the market. Look internally, nurture people, bring them on board, and train them, and actually look. Don't just look in the IT team, look across the business. And the other thing is the apprentice scheme. Now, I'm an original 1980s apprentice guy, so big supporter for that process. But if you look at the apprentice schemes that are coming through now, some of the NCSC funding that's coming around, that's some of what these guys are doing. You know, that's where you start. Actually start at the ground and bring those people into the organisation and spend and invest the time on training them if you create the right environment for them to work, and it's not about salary, it's about training, it's about nurture, it's about experience, exposure, travel, you name it, then you're going to get a really good set of skills. If you think about it, it's exactly the same approach that GCHQ were doing now when they're bringing the next generation of cyber resource on. They recognise that process works. And I think that for me is the challenge, is there's not many people in the market, you've got a lot of good people in-house, you need to actually bring them up to speed, get them on board.
Yeah. Can we go along the line, John?
Totally agree with that. I'm trying to do the same thing and look internally, but I'm also looking at graduates, people who I feel that have aptitude to do certain things, so I can bring them in and nurture them to do things within our organisation and to develop the security culture that I need to be able to have as well. Most important thing that I want to get for them on day one is, here's something new, make it your aim to learn something, to achieve something every day, no matter how small it is, and then do that over and over again. I think if you do that, you can move mountains when you do that with people, and you get the right people to do that. But the time that you need to invest into finding those sorts of people and developing them is most important, and it is certainly for us anyway the best way to go.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I'm obviously going to say training, but actually not just say, paying lip service to it and going to HR and saying, here's a personal development plan for everybody on the last day of the appraisals that are due, but it's actually building it into the DNA and culture of the team. And so you're doing things like skills assessments, you're spotting skills gaps, you're giving people access to really high quality training, you're following up on it. It's a management commitment to say, I'm going to spend time on doing this. So when you bring people in, or you want to cross train them, or all of a sudden someone decides they're going to go out and buy a brand new framework, and you've got no idea of the security holes in that framework or how it works, it's right, and it's not what you do in the evenings, and it's not what you do at the weekends, it's actually part of what you do in your day job. Is like, hey, we said you'd do the skills assessment for this in the next 2 weeks. Come on, you need to do that. You can do that tomorrow morning. Hey, that skills assessment showed you need to do some of these modules. Go off and do these modules and training. And look, in a month's time, we expect you to be there. It's not that once a year, oh gosh, we have to fill in this hole on the appraisal form. It's like, where do you need to be in the next month? The other thing I'd love to hear from you,
I think we almost run out of time. But.
So at coffee breaks, how do you train security thinking? So we all know what we mean by security thinking. It's looking at it and going, there's the risk. How do you train that as opposed to skills-based, the skills?
Okay.
I'll be quick.
Yeah, thank you.
So for a start, be specific on your job descriptions. I've seen far too many where they want jack of all trades, master of all trades, and if you want to pay peanuts, you're going to get monkeys. That tiny little bit where it's like information security person, head of Europe, blah blah blah. Also, could you run our GDPR program? That would be wonderful. That's a big one. And I think the other thing, something that I've always been firmly a believer of, is that your basic fundamentals is common sense in this industry. Don't be scared to bring somebody in that doesn't necessarily have the qualifications but has the common sense, and train them up. And if you invest in them, they will invest back in you. But if they don't have the common sense, then you're building a house on a very rocky basis.
Brilliant. To the panel, I'd just like to say thank you, Brian, John, Pete. Much appreciated, and really good start today. Thank you.